playing with fire before the disaster. That's the accusation against the council that owned Grenfell, Kensington and Chelsea. Together with the tower's managers, they violated the human rights of the residents.
It was in their fears that their building was unsafe and in their helplessness that their concerns were not only ignored but actively opposed by their landlord and managing agent, who could act with impunity and did, we say, act in violation of their human rights.
This is the end of the inquiry's look at how residents were treated before the fire. 72 people died in the tragedy, and lawyers acting for survivors and bereaved blamed the council and its tenant management organisation for not keeping them safe.
Critical inaccuracies include failure to take into account the effect of combustible cladding and the presence of vulnerable and disabled people, and the consequential failure of TMO and RBKC to prepare personal emergency evacuation plans.
The tower's tragedy, the inquiry was reminded, was that several residents over many years warned that Grenfell was unsafe.
The tenants and residents had already been pointing out that there were deficiencies and there were concerns. We wouldn't be sitting here if people had listened, and not only listened but acted upon what the tenants were saying.
It fills me with upset and anger.
Edward Daffan escaped from the 16th floor. He was one of the residents who said Grenfell was unsafe before the fire.
There are still buildings up and down the country that are covered with exactly the same cladding as Grenfell was. And there are still residents up and down the country that are still being ill-treated and abused by their landlords with no recourse to the law to make things change for them.
But the lawyer representing the Kensington and Chelsea tenant management organisation said Grenfell's flammable cladding was not an isolated case.
The fact that so many other buildings were and continue to be clad in similarly dangerous materials speaks to the very remote possibility that any one investigation would have exposed the deep-seated and far-ranging misconception that gave rise to the tragedy at Grenfell Tower.
And tomorrow the council will give its closing statement on this stage of the Grenfell Inquiry.
Now, Rags, the finger of blame wasn't just directed at the council and its tenant management organisation, but also at the government.
That's right, Ronke. Ultimately, the people in charge are the government. They make the rules, they pass the laws. And at the time of the Grenfell fire, councils were operating under something called the Local Government Association's Fire Safety Guidance, which the inquiry heard today was and still is unlawful and unacceptable.
The ongoing fault, and indeed scandal, lies with government, which for over a decade now, and over 4 years after the Grenfell fire, has failed and still fails to declare that part of the LGA guide unlawful and unacceptable.
Well, Danny Friedman urged the inquiry to write to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, about this. We asked the government for a response, and they told us this. As part of the steps we're taking, we've conducted a consultation on personal emergency evacuation plans, specifically for tower blocks. But 4.5 years on after Grenfell, survivors say progress and improvements are far too slow.
OK, Rags, thanks very much.